I am very honored to introduce Ms. Madeleine Rees.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction. I feel so old when I go through the things that I have done. How many of you in here are personally happy? Very good. How many of you are happy with the state of the world? Good, because that means you're on the same line as I am. And if you're on the same line as I am, then you know that we need to make changes. I want to talk about how we got to the state we're in now and what we can do to change it. It's strange that we're all unhappy with the way the world is now, because think what we have achieved. The organization I work for now, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, been talking for 100 years of the need to address root causes of conflict, to address inequalities, and to make sure we have a multilateral system which brings peace. We have it. The United Nations is the biggest peace organization in the world. It was set up to make sure that conflict resolution was done through arbitration, not through violent conflict. We have 9 human rights treaties, which all demand equality. We have a women, peace and security agenda, which is essentially to make sure that women have their rights to participate at all levels, before conflict, during conflict, after conflict, and that we do that on the basis of equality. But not just to participate, to actually make sure that we make that fundamental difference. We've had 4 World Conferences on women, culminating in Beijing, and what a fantastic outcome that was. So if I worked for the UN, as I used to, as you know, I would tick all my boxes and think, yes, what a great job. What's our problem? The problem is, it's not working. When we look at the root causes of conflict, we need to address how we get there. And there are 2 major ways in which we do that. One is through militarism and militarization. You can't have a war if you don't have militaries to fight them. You have a different type of war, and you need to address those root causes which lie and are buried in economic power structures. And it's highly, highly gendered. Last year alone, the world spent $1.776 trillion on arms. That's 480 years of the UN regular budget, 6,800 years of funding for UN women. We could have realized all the Millennium Development Goals and lived happily ever after. We could live them several times over, not just once. But we didn't. We put them into the arms race. And we use those guns. We use those arms. We have 18 conflicts burning as we speak, not to mention what's going on in Mexico and other countries, which are undeclared wars. So with all that happening, why? I want to look at the political economy and gendered analysis within that. We are creatures of our environments. We are brought up in particular ways to do particular things. I have a 9-year-old daughter, and sometimes I let her watch cartoons, not often, particularly where there's one, it's called Wings Club. And I sat down and watched it with her, and there are these delightful fairies, I think, going off to play with butterflies and flowers. No, what are they doing? Fighting the bad boys. And they're fighting the bad boys, not talking to the bad boys, but they're using their special powers to destroy the bad boys. So from the time of this age on, we now have little girls using their idea, being indoctrinated into the idea that you use your power to destroy. Bad things, yes, but you don't enter into dialogue. That's different. I'm old enough and ugly enough to know that we were never taught to do that when I was little. We played with butterflies and flowers. But we now have this fundamental change that we as women are now being brought into a system which is militarizing us. So girls can use weapons as well as boys. Of course we can. The normative framework actually dictates that we have the equality to bear arms, and I would endorse that as a human rights lawyer. But why? Why do we do that? When men don't want to do it either. But there's a system in place which requires that we keep doing this. And this is where we get to the economy of power. Those billions that were put into defense and security, who are they defending? The 1% of the world's population, which owns 48% of the world's wealth as of today, whereas next year it's going to be 52%. 2 years after that, it is likely to be up to 90% of the world's wealth because it's growing exponentially. So we have a huge and vast increase in resources in very, very few hands. And what do they need? A security system to protect that system. And we're part of that system. And it starts in political economy. No point in talking about gender unless we talk about our relationship to power. Men and women have a relationship to power, and it is gendered. It starts in the family. Who has power? Economic, physical, and other. It spreads into employment. It goes in through education into how we then participate in public life. And on the whole, it's favored in terms of men. That's patriarchy. It's instrumentalizing all of us to protect and participate in systems which then are highly militarized, economically disenfranchising, and ultimately will deny our fundamental human rights. So what do? We have to reclaim our international law. We have to reclaim our international system. It's not good enough that we now have a default position in international law where military response is the first response, not the last response. None of you could have missed what's gone on in Yemen, Iraq particularly, Syria, and now with Yemen it's slightly different because military response was the first response. And it was the second response. Once we had bombed them first time, we now have to go and do it again. Didn't work first time, try it again. Who gets hurt? The civilian population. Used to be, in wars, 10% of the population with civilians would be killed, 90% would be soldiers. It's now the other way around. And that's highly gendered because the civilian population are predominantly women, children, and the men who don't fight. And so now it's predominantly women and children who are targeted. Not targeted, collateral damage. So we have to think through what that means in terms of what we need to be doing. We can no longer allow the United Nations to sit back and allow international law to be subverted by the power structures and apparent interests of nation states, when in fact those nation states are supposed democracies, but who are influenced enormously by the power of the corporations who pay for the election campaigns of various participants in the political system. How do we change that? It starts with us. It absolutely starts with us. Every single one of you kept your hands down when I said, are you happy with the world situation? Which means every single one of you can do something. We are about to start another 100 years campaign to try to make what we said in 1915 true now and work now. It starts with equality. It starts with a gender analysis of power and how that works, and how we are going to ground that in fundamental changes within our families, within our education systems, within our employment systems, and from there into how our politicians and our representatives represent what we want, not what nameless, faceless, non-transparent, non-accountable corporations do. We need law to regulate it. We need law to help us to realize those things. So it means we have to engage in making sure and being forever vigilant that those laws and those politicians are us and represent us. We have to take those into the international multilateral system so that the policies are reflective of the things that I've said need to be changed, that they uphold international law. It is not good enough that Margaret Wallström declares a feminist foreign policy, calls Saudi Arabia a medieval state, which everybody calls it when it comes to beheading and human rights protections, and nobody in the international community supports her. Where were your foreign ministers? Where were they? They should be saying, yes, she is right. That's international law. That's international obligation. We must do things around that. They didn't. Everyone hid behind the deals that needed to be made to sell more arms, to buy oil, whatever it would be, to keep that economic privileged few privileged. So we need more of that. We need more accountability. We need to make sure that the courts that we set up, International Court of Justice, International Criminal Court, that are there to stop the worst ravages of conflict by dispute resolution and through arbitration and through criminal prosecution of those who violate. Everybody, every state needs to sign up to those mechanisms so that we do have accountability. In closing, my daughter, she watches Winged Club, yes, but she was also very, very taken, because we lived in France, in the Charlie Hebdo killings. As you recall, that was about ostensible freedom of speech issues, perhaps irresponsibly used, perhaps offensive to some. But she said, they didn't have to kill each other, Mummy, did they? They just had to talk, that's all. And that's what we need to do, to make the mechanisms that allow us to talk, to work for us. And to do that, we have to look to ourselves to make those work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please stay on stage with me for a second. Thank you very much.